then we see the idea of what Lenny has done previous to this, and it says, and you ain't going to do no bad things like you done in Reed. And that's really important because it sets up a backstory for us. We know that something's happened, and we know that Lenny then has some kind of previous experience, and George trying to warn him and kind of control him here by telling him this is interesting. When we find ourselves at the novel's conclusion, what's interesting is that we think, like, when we look back at some of the warnings here, obviously they're not really kind of peppered with any kind of real strength behind them, you know, just telling him something like this, maybe something stronger could have been done, etc. So maybe it shows us in some ways George's kind of lack of intelligence, or to some level, you know, not being able to get full control or make sure this was fully understood or realized. But also you could argue that it just as easily shows us how Lenny did not have a capacity to learn, which we'll come to when we look at Lenny. He calls Lenny a lot of trouble, so we understand the situation that he's in, obviously how troubled he is and how frustrated he is with Lenny. He also says to him, I could live so easy, maybe have a girl. And that's really interesting because George isn't only going to give up then on Lenny if he lets Lenny go, but it also kind of tells us in a way, obviously first of all he's saying he could have it easy, but second of all he's also saying that he'd kind of give up on the idea of a dream himself, because obviously if one is their own master and has their own land and etc etc etc, then obviously he'd have to work his land and he'd obviously have to make arrangements on his land. So it's no means an easy life at the beginning. So that idea there that he could live so easy kind of just shows, you know, maybe sometimes he just wants the easiest way out, but that is not actually what he wants, because as we know, what he wants in many ways is the American dream. So again, the dismissiveness towards Lenny, he says there's no reason at all for you to like being out here in the clearing. I like it here. So it shows that they always do what he wants to do, and he's the one in control. We also, through this line here where he actually talks about his Aunt Clara, Lenny's Aunt Clara, he says about the mice, you always killed them. And that's really important because we kind of get the idea here that Lenny is associated with death the whole time. You know, we've already seen he's got a dead creature with him. We've seen he's done it before. And obviously these things are obviously undoubtedly going to happen again. He also said to him, you're going to get that wood, which kind of shows the master-servant thing, you know. And also you could look at it in terms of Lenny makes George's life a little easier because, you know, he has a servant around him and obviously a defender around him, as we see later on, or you know, a kind of a wall of strength, and also a reason to be employed anywhere around him. So it's kind of, we can't forget the benefits that he gets out of his relationship with Lenny as well, something that's all too easily forgotten. Well, a lot of students, when they write about essays, they only focus on what George does for Lenny, but we've got to remember the symbiotic nature of this relationship and how they help each other. He says to him then, I could stay in a cat house all night, I could eat any place I want, get a gallon of whiskey, or sit in a pool and play cards, shoot pool, So we've got all these kind of things that he talks about, which are just really base desires, you know. So when he's talking about it, we've got to ask ourselves, do we believe that is what he wants when he says it to Lenny, or is it just his frustration? And obviously you can come to any conclusion you want, but the fact that he says it here is just kind of a list of banal ranch worker things to do, and it kind of tells us, you know, at some level, and of the fact that he's mentioned this twice now, because obviously we've got that quotation earlier on, maybe George doesn't have the kind of the capacity and the drive and the mentality to really go for the dream. Maybe this kind of shows that, you know, deep down his kind of core structures and belief are as base as anyone else. And he says here again, this shows their relationship, you get in trouble, and the fact that that's a short sentence is kind of really powerful. He just says, you get in trouble, and then you do bad things, and I got to get you out. So first of all, the way he speaks to Lenny is simple. That could be a reference to obviously how he has to speak to Lenny, and obviously his own lack of some kind of education, but also in reference to his what he has to do, and obviously a lack of nobility as well, like, you know, making it that clear. But obviously we're not building up George to be a hero character, so it's fine. He also says, I never get no peace from living with Lenny and from the way he has to be. But then at the same time, we find the contradiction, because he never gets no peace because he's got Lenny around, but then he feels he's special because he has Lenny. So again, we have to look at all these contradictions in George. And then obviously he has a go at him, and obviously he says all these things. He has a go at him, but he says, look, I want you to stay with me. And that's probably quite genuine, because he's not only saying it to make Lenny feel better, but he's saying it as well because he knows. And this is interesting, it comes just before he gives Lenny the rabbits, what's known as the rabbit speech. It's really interesting because he wants him to stay with me because he knows that having him is the real difference between him and any other man. That's the only difference between him and any other man. And as we see later on in the novel, it's actually mentioned as a weird thing for two people to be traveling around with each other. So here we find again a little on that when he starts to talk about that rhythmic speech, guys like us, etc., etc., George's voice became deeper. And that's really interestingly put, because it's kind of like a mantra for them, almost like it has like a religious prayer-like feel. His voice became deeper, and he repeats the words rhythmically. So obviously they're ingrained in him. It's something he lives by, a code that he's had to make himself believe, or a code that he wants to believe. And obviously he says, and again, it's like he said it many times before, and from place to place, all his life. And you just got to kind of think of George as kind of person as well in this aspect, like everyone, everyone probably went around thinking something along the lines, had their own mantra, something that they had to believe in to keep going, because we've been offered already the other alternative, this base life. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world, but we ain't like that. We got a future, we got somebody to talk to, and someone that gives a damn about us. And that part there, the last one, those two linked sentences, they're very, very important, because it shows how ultimately he wants to feel, even if it's not how he feels all the time, it's how he wants to feel. I'm sure he wishes for a better companion than Lenny, but at least he's got a companion. And even if it is this strange master dog like pet-like relationship, then he knows he's got something. It's better than nothing. And of course, the most important thing that he says here in this chapter, in this section, is that it warns Lenny, if something happens and you get in trouble, but if we know it's going to happen, because even though he says if here, straight after he says like you always done. So again, Steinbeck is just offering us the idea that this is undeniable. It's definitely going to happen. He's always definitely going to get in trouble. And so George is smart enough to have a contingency plan ready for him there. I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. And obviously when we come back later on, that is one of the things that Lenny can remember. So that's a brief introduction to George in section 1, and we'll go through and do some more in a minute.